Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Chillport Podcast, episode 319. I'm Benjamin Yoder, here today, talking about video games, although we're not going to be doing I feel like we always go into the although, we're not going to be talking about one individual, game that I have impressions of this week. I was going to do that for Dragon Marked for Death, but there's just a lot of stuff here that I thought was worth, going in a little more in-depth into. So I think it makes more sense to focus on those things rather than one big thing this week. So Dragon Marked for Death, continually getting pushed off, although I'm sure there's a podcast episode I talked about in the past whenever I played through the Switch release on that, but we will get to it. But this week we're going to have some updates on some games I've been playing. Then we're also going to talk about some new games that got announced. There's a Harry Potter game that kind of caught my eye. I have not played it, but I did want to just talk about it a little bit. And then also a big H game company is going out of business, so 18 plus game company in Japan. I'm aware of them. I'm not an expert on them, but I did think it was worth talking about since these guys have been around since the 90s and made some, I think, pretty important games in that space. I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a strong knowledge of that place, but I have some vague ideas, so we're going to talk about them a little bit. I'm going to put the H-game thing at the at the end of the show this week, just so if you don't want to hear about it, it is 18 plus stuff, then you don't have to listen to it if you don't want to. Otherwise, though, let's get into the show. Before we get into everything, though, I did want to just note, I found out about something this last week. So if you don't know, a topic of discussion many years ago at this point for us was 3DS capture cards, because I was looking into getting a 3DS capture card, and there's the one that got, the Japanese one that got put out of business because of some, I think it was some law in Japan that changed regarding, basing businesses around modifying hardware. And then also there's the loopy one, which is the one that I ended up going with. But at the time, it was only an original 3DS board, so you had to use an original 3DS. But that's what I ended up doing, and I ended up getting that. I found out earlier this year, I think, there's actually new 3DS XL capture cards through Loopy now. So if you send him a new 3DS XL capture card, it's $200 for the whole process. I don't remember if shipping is included or not, but I've been very happy with my Loopy card so far, just not, this specific one. But that's pretty cool because those new 3DS XLs, I think, are generally more accessible out there. And, there's some features in certain games you'll get some benefits from being on a new 3DS in general. The only real downside, I think, to new 3DS XLs, other than just, depending on how you feel about the feel of the console as a whole, is that the resolution on the screen itself, if you do original resolution DS games or something like that, when you're looking at them on the actual 3DS XL screen, you can't really do what an original DS would look like, so you're always going to get some kind of blown up image kind of thing, if I recall correctly. I believe that's the case. And I don't know if that has any impact on the actual capture of the game. I would assume probably not, because I'm going to guess the video signal itself is probably the same, but just something to consider and look into. I know there's some videos out there about this new 3DS XL capture card, new 3DS XL capture. We're back to the new 3DS problem of is it a new 3DS XL capture card, or is it a capture card for the new 3DS XL? Anyways, but I just thought I'd mention that in case you are somebody who is looking into that. Potentially I'll look into it in the future, but for now I've been very happy with the current card I have at the moment. But, when it comes to this kind of stuff, it is a very specialized piece of equipment, and, having somebody who will actually install it for you is nice. You can buy the card itself on its own too. So that is an option for you. I think the card itself is $170. So you're basically paying $30 with the labor or something like that, I think. So anyways, more 3DS XL or more 3DS capture options are very nice. So I think he may have discontinued the old 3DS capture boards. I could be wrong. I did not see them listed on the website when I looked. So, but I did not look super, super hard. I did just want to give you guys some updates on some games I've been playing. Nothing that I'm going to go too in depth here, because I'm not really ready to do a full quote unquote review. We're not Shanghaiing it this week in terms of just having a big long discussion about Shanghai. But in my multiplayer gaming sessions, I've been playing Binary Domain recently. Binary Domain single player campaign does not have multiplayer co-op, and the PvP in there requires 6 people, and we do not have 6 people. So really the only mode you can play is the invasion mode. Basically a wave-based survival mode kind of thing. It's pretty intense and pretty hard. And one of the challenges is that the wave-based mode does not have any real continue option. So it's probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours if you want to get all the way up to wave 50. And if you die, it's all the way back to wave 1. So it is really, really not friendly in a player perspective. Also, there's a leveling system in that game that seems to unlock various like modifiers you can apply to your character. And that leveling system is barely noticeable in binary domain when it comes to the invasion mode. The EXP that you get seems incredibly low. So it seems like the competitive multiplayer is really where you need to go to level up your character, but again, requires 6 people in a match at the very least for a public match. So private matches you can do less, but you don't get any EXP from playing a private match. So, well, I think there might be some challenges you might be able to do, but that's, as far as I'm aware, not nearly enough to get you up to like a reasonable enough, high enough level kind of thing. But I do like how that game plays and feels, and I do think I like a good challenge. I like a good like a shooter that requires coordination. I'm really into. So I've been playing a little bit of Street Fighter 6. Nothing really new there. Just some of my friends have mentioned like, hey, I want to play a little bit of this, so I kind of just go on and do my thing. I do in the inputs that I'm gonna do. And the only thing that I was not aware of is my friend showed me there's like golden cabs sometimes in the online space, or maybe all the time, I don't know. And those golden cabs have like special modes in there, so you can do things where it's like, oh, get this many knockdowns on another player, or like get points by using this particular type of move and things like that. So pretty cool like bonus mode in there. I was kind of surprised maybe a little bit more of that stuff didn't appear in the World Tour mode, honestly. But, when I think about how World of Light was in like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate or something like that, I don't necessarily know if that's like super, super fun to do that kind of stuff in a like single player capacity. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's still fun. I've mainly been playing Marissa. And then I also play a little bit of Ken and DJ, but I don't remember any of DJ's moves really. But Marissa's kind of, I think, my main, I guess you could say, but I'm not good at her or anything like that. I just kind of punch a bunch. And then for the last multiplayer thing, although it kind of mixes into single player as well, is I've been playing Toukiden Kiwami. This is the first Toukiden game, but it's the remake of it. So the original Toukiden's a PSP game. Toukiden Kiwami was PSP, Vita, and PS4. At this point, didn't realize how old this game is. Like almost a decade old at this point, this remake. But I really liked Toukiden 2 when I played Toukiden 2, and I was a little worried going back to Toukiden Kiwami that the things that Toukiden 2 had that were kind of neat novelties of it, like the grapple arm, although, a lot of those kind of games have grapples in them now. And then at the time, Freedom Wars was around as well. But grapple arm thing. But the other thing was that the world itself was kind of an open world, which at the time, Monster Hunter hadn't really gotten to that spot yet. So it was kind of cool. And I like the world of Toukiden a lot. So thankfully, though, that stuff aside, I still think it's a really fun and unique game. And or maybe not unique, but a really fun game with a style that I really like. I like the storytelling a lot in the Toukiden games too, and I also really like the Mitamas as well, which is like these spirits that you get, and like the story-based Mitamas have this really nice thing where they basically tell you about the last moments before they die, and they're not always great, but I do think they're kind of fun because you get to see a little bit of the character's personality, like, if when they were dying, was it like a somber thing for them, or like there's this one guy who was like dueling somebody, and like he was talking about how in the middle of the duel, like an Oni showed up and basically started eating him. And he was like, like the greatest joy of my life was seeing my opponent be shocked by the Oni eating me, or something like that. So it seemed like it was kind of funny. I really like the Mitamas though in that game, and they all have their own voice clips and stuff. And what's kind of nice because the Mitamas basically are your like buffs in that game. So you can equip up to 3 Mitamas, and they're all based off historical figures. And so their relationships actually kind of combine to make different buffs as well. So if you have characters who are related to each other, you can combine them. And so their builds are kind of built to complement each other. But you can equip any of them, and you make any combination you want if you'd like. But, it's kind of nice that these things that are basically just buffs that get attached to you kind of have their own personalities. I do kind of wish that they would be more long-term personalities, like something that you more regularly interacted with when you have these characters attached to you kind of thing. But I do think like the initial intention of that's still really cool. So, but yeah, anyway, so Toukiden Kiwami, Still a very cool game though, and I'm really enjoying it. But there is a single player. So the biggest problem with that game from a multiplayer perspective is that the multiplayer and single player progress are separate from each other. So you can't just like, not like God Eater, get together every like once a week and just play through the story of that game together. You have to go spend your own time doing the story and then go online and then do that stuff with your friends. And thankfully, like, they don't restrict you from a mission progress standpoint of like what missions you can do. So like you can get to chapter 5 online, even though you're in like chapter 1 in the single player. But they do restrict your ability to upgrade gear and buy gear based off your single player story progression. So there's like a soft cap that happens just due to how that whole thing works. So yeah. And then the last game that I've been trying to play, I haven't been playing it as much as I'd like to, but I've been trying to put like a good 5 hours-ish into it a week, but I don't know if I'm going to get to it this week, unfortunately, is Arkwright's Fantasia for the Nintendo Wii. This is a RPG pretty late in the Wii's lifespan, I feel like. Maybe not, maybe like 2009, 2010. And a friend of mine actually said that it's like kind of budget tri-ace game, which I kind of see what it is, see what they mean by that. But it has a pretty cool combat system, and it has a very like Tales feel to it when it comes to the story, but like Tales that's a little off kilter is maybe the way I should put it, because like there's a lot of really weird stuff that happens in the story. And I was about 10 hours in, and there's actually kind of like a fairly major event that's kind of weird as well. And it's done a lot of things, I think, story-wise, that like it makes you feel comfortable for a while, but then it does something just enough to be like it just throws, like, makes you comfortable, and then like all of a sudden flips you over, like in the middle of that. So it's like every 5 or 10 hours, they like flip you over, and they're like, oh, here's something you didn't expect, kind of thing. And I kind of like that. It kind of feels like it plays with the more standard elements of its story in fun ways because of that. So about 15 hours in, so much more of that game to go. It's a JRPG, so, you know, probably at least another 30 to 50 hours maybe. So anyways, we shall see. And that's pretty much it for stuff I've been playing. I would like to mix in a little bit of like very short play session games in my life. You know, I've been thinking a lot about mobile games recently, but the problem with mobile games is that even if you can play them in short play sessions, they're really intended to be played long term if you do it that way. And so like you're not going to make a lot of progress, I feel like. Where I feel like there are other games that's not necessarily the case, like puzzle games, you can kind of do it as you want. Like, I really would like to get back to Ochan's P-Cross. That's that Sunsoft P-Cross game. The big thing is I just didn't know how to save in that game. I thought I knew how to save, but every time I'd save, like, none of my progress would be saved. So I just need to crack that manual open and just use the machine translation on it just to figure out what I'm doing wrong there. The other thing that would be more interesting to me is probably playing Monster Battle Road, the Dragon Quest arcade game that got a Wii port. I'm definitely thinking heavily about that. The biggest challenge with that is I will need to basically figure out what the cards are that I'm working with, and basically keep a set of notes based off what the cards are doing and things like that, so I can actually understand what each card does. This is kind of the problem that I ran into a little bit with Dragon Quest Dai when I was playing that in Japan, is that like it's a card-based game, and sure, I can see the numbers on the card and be like, what numbers are bigger, but I don't necessarily know like what the benefits of each individual card is because it's all in Japanese. And so the more I think nuanced strategy of those games, you know, it's a kid's game, so I don't want to say that there's like some extreme depth I'm missing here or something like that. But the why you would use a card outside of just raw numbers is something that's kind of just lost on you a little bit. So with Monster Battle Road, I want to make sure that that's not something that happens. And since I'm playing that at my home, I don't think it'll be as big of a deal as like trying to, in the middle of a trip, like, you know, research a video game and understand like how it works, like in the moment kind of thing. And then like Big Brain Academy games and things like that, I really need to sit down and play through as well. So, I mean, Big Brain Academy games and stuff like that, I don't think you ever really finish, but I think you just kind of feel a natural point, which when you have kind of expended all the content of that game, I guess. So, yeah. Anyways, that's kind of what's up with me, though. Before we get into news and stuff, we're going to go to Jillian's Corner. Jillian has a question. Jillian, what you got there? Open your hands, Jillian. It's like a pet. Open your mouth. Open your mouth. What do you have in there? Open your mouth and show me your question, Jillian. She supports me on Ko-fi. Thank you so much, Jillian, for your Ko-fi support. If you want to support me on Ko-fi, feel free to reach out to me with a question. I would be happy to answer it. Jillian's question is, name the third-party games that defined your childhood. I did not make any notes on this. I forgot to. Childhood is also kind of a weird thing to think about. We're going to do this raw, though. I'm not stopping the podcast. I'm not pausing it. We are not pausing right now. It is third-party game moment in my brain. What was ones that defined my childhood? We talk about Iggy's Wrecking Ball next week. Chameleon Twist, that was pretty cool. I liked that game a lot. As a kid, I was really into that on Nintendo 64. Obviously, I think the Final Fantasy franchise is one I'm still like really into and stuff like that. StarCraft. I was actually talking, so a friend of mine asked the question of like, what's the appeal of Diablo 4 recently? And I'm probably the worst person to ask that question, right? I feel like, I mean, obviously Diablo 4 is a game that reviewed really well, and I did go and like watch some reviews after he asked me this, because I was just like, yeah, I actually don't know what the appeal of Diablo really is at the moment. Like, I guess I had some theories, but I wasn't quite sure. And so like, I was thinking about that, and like the conclusion I think I've come to for now, tell me if you feel differently, is Diablo is more about a stat game kind of thing. Like the combat and stuff of Diablo doesn't really matter that much. Although he told me that in the more recent games, movement has like been a big deal, like Diablo 3 and 4. I haven't played 3 or 4. I've only played 1 and 2. So movement's like a part of that. But I think to me, like stats is like maybe the big thing of like, I'm going to build out this build, and the stats that I put on this build will determine how destructive it is. Which, I mean, I think you could say that about a lot of RPGs, but I think you can also say that like a lot of RPGs put different levels of focus on that, and the different level of like stat manipulation lets you like change how you play your character. So I think it depends on how like stats affect the gameplay, maybe is the bigger thing. Again, I haven't played Diablo recently, so but I played a lot of Diablo growing up, and Diablo 1 specifically, I think like I don't think about it very often, honestly. I think Diablo 1 is a very striking game to me from an aesthetic standpoint. You know, I hadn't really played, I mean, I play like Quake and stuff like that, but I don't think Quake takes its like aesthetics too super seriously. Or maybe I should say, when you play a multiplayer game of Quake, you're not really thinking about the aesthetics of it. So there is like this kind of like demon Satan vibe to Quake. But I feel like Diablo, it feels more real, maybe because it is an RPG with characters who talk to you and things like that. And if I recall correctly, like once you get to a certain point in the story, I think the town changes a little bit as well, which is kind of neat. I think they make it so like it's a client side thing, so like different people see different towns based off what's happening, basically. So I could be wrong. This is my memory. But I remember really being impressed by Diablo 1 and really enjoying it. Diablo 2, I think I was a little less interested in at the time. I probably played it more, honestly, just because I think there was more people I knew playing Diablo 2. But I think I always kind of somewhat preferred Diablo 1. But I think if I went back and compared it, it'd be more of this is the first time I experienced that vibe in a game, of just like this very like foreboding vibe. Like Diablo was a game that just felt very foreboding to me as a kid, I think. And like, I think it was a game that it felt wrong to play to some extent. Maybe like my parents didn't care. I think my mom would have cared if she knew what it was. Like she knew the game's name was Diablo. She has some idea. And like the cover has like a Satan on it with like fire all over or something like that. Right. So it's like, she knew, but she probably didn't really know what's going on. But like, I think there was just like a very kind of like, I don't know, very, very weird feeling to playing Diablo as a kid with that. So let's get out of that age range. As a teenager, what would be, I mean, Skies of Arcadia, I think, is a game that I think is something that's really important to me. I think there's just like a lot to be said about Skies of Arcadia from like a game that I think is a game that I feel like has a good message to it in a lot of ways, in terms of like the positivity and stuff like that, right? Like Vice is a character that just never really ever stops and like gets depressed. I mean, there's like a single moment where he's like, I don't know if I can do this. And then immediately another guy's like, what are you talking about? You can do this? He's like, yeah, I can do this. So I think there's like a lot of stuff with that I really appreciated. And like, did I live my life by that? But I don't know. I don't remember why we talked about this once, but like all of a sudden I just remembered one of the podcast episodes is called like Vice doing your taxes or something like that. Would I trust Vice to do my taxes? That was, I don't remember why that came up, but anyways. So yeah, and then probably Blue Stinger's the last one, although I think that's technically a Sega game. It was published by third parties here in the US, but Blue Stinger, I think, was a big game for me because it made me realize that like a game doesn't necessarily need to be good for me to love it. It can be entertaining, and I don't think Blue Stinger's a bad game. I think a lot of people would say it's a bad, like so good it's bad, or so bad it's good. I don't think I believe that with Blue Stinger. I think Blue Stinger is very entertaining on its own. So, anyways. Thank you, Jillian, for your question. I appreciate it. Again, Ko-fi, you can go there, donate if you want to support me. I've been trying to make some posts there that are more like behind the scenes posts of like what's going on in my brain. I'm trying to, I think, move that stuff out of the podcast a little bit. I sometimes worry that like on the podcast, if I sit there and like start the show by talking about like, what am I doing with the YouTube channel? Like people who come here for like weird, obscure game news might not necessarily be interested in that. So I think Ko-fi's probably a good place. If you're probably giving me money, you probably care about, you know, what I'm doing, I guess. So anyways, that's probably the plan for that. I don't know. Right now it's all written. Maybe someday I'll be doing voice stuff, but for now it's written. I've only done one post too, so who knows? Maybe I'll give up on that. But I have a few things in mind of like what I think I would like to post about and talk about there. So let's get into news, baby. I forgot to make this a news story. Let me mark it as a news story. I have a heading for news stories, and then I broke the whole formatting. All right, well, as long as I recognize that this is a news story and don't skip over it. Anyways, there's a new game from Digital Eclipse that got announced. This is in the vibe of like their Atari game that was like a documentary game that I still haven't played. I really need to play it. Called, I think it's just called Making of Karateka. Yeah. Or Karateka, how you want to pronounce it? Karateka, Karateka, Karateka. I don't know. I'd say Karateka. Let's say Karateka. And it's just basically trying to build a documentary experience around one video game. And one of the cool things about Karateka is I believe like they found like I think all that stuff's been preserved. So they have design docs, they have prototypes that were made and that are playable. And I think I would imagine they might have different versions of Karateka in there too. I don't remember for sure on that, but it's really cool to see somebody taking like an individual game and basically making a video game about the story of making it. Right? That's really cool. I think that's really awesome. I really like the trend of like documentary focused games rather than just like a game collection that has documentary materials in it. Right? Making that stuff be more than just something you click in on the menu, make it be something that's integrated into the experience. Because when you put something behind a menu that's like gallery or something like that, most of your players are not going to see that, right? If you have like a database like Xenosaga 3, you're not going to see, most players are not going to go in the database of Xenosaga 3 and like read what's in there, right? That if you're putting it behind that, immediately you're saying like only 2% of our players are ever going to read this, right? So I think that's true for like documentary feature stuff as well. So the other game that's not out yet, but it's in early access, and I don't know if, I mean, this isn't a news story, but I don't know if I guess I would put it in the same grouping of these games, but the topic is very different, which is 6 Days in Fallujah. That's that one military game that's trying to take a like documentary approach to that conflict. Which is like in the Iraq war. It's an Iraq thing. Iraq war. And I'm curious to see how that turns out. You know, there's a lot of old military games on like Xbox and stuff that do have things that were like, here's a dude from World War II talking. But again, same deal. It's locked behind a gallery. It's not really a part of the experience as a whole, right? Some games try to do a little bit more of that. I won't get into that right now. And I'm curious to see if 6 Days in Fallujah can do something more in line with what Digital Eclipse is doing, but with a obviously more serious topic of an actual conflict. The biggest problem I can read from 6 Days in Fallujah is that in order to get funding, they went to the U.S. government for the military for funding, which, you know, that's a direct conflict of interest, right? So I think you can't really take anything in there as like, there's going to be a bend to it, right? That's the thing. There's going to be a bend to that story, and you just have to be aware of that. And so, but I'm curious about that at some point. So anyways, making Karateka. I made a decree at the start of that section and broke it at the very end. Way Forward is bringing Rose and Camilla, I think that's how you pronounce that, Rose and Camilla to the collection to the US. This is that one old Flash game that is basically a game where you go into one-on-one fights with other women in like a mansion, like a Victorian mansion kind of thing. And so you do slap fights with each other, basically. It's a really popular game back in the day. and it got around. But I think I was not aware there were so many. There's like 5 games in that series. I was not aware of that. I have no idea where those games are distributed, if they're all Flash, if they're ever sold, if they're always free or what. But anyway, so they're adding English voice acting, which is pretty cool. And they're just kind of compiling everything into that. And I think they're adding a bunch of features around it as well. So that's really cool. The only problem right now is that this is actually announced, or I don't know if it's announced, but is the place that I found out about this and where it was featured was through Limited Run Games Showcase, which that means, physical copies are going to be through Limited Run Games. And if you know me, I'm not like the Limited Run Games model just doesn't work for me. Again, nothing wrong with Limited Run Games, but I'm not a fan of taking pre-orders and then waiting sometimes year plus, for a game to get delivered to you. And, I would rather just buy it whenever I'm ready for that game. So, obviously digitally it will be available whenever. Yeah, that's the one downside. So it's also coming out in Europe as well. So I don't know if Limited Run Games publishes in Europe as well, but hopefully, like, if it gets a European release, it'll be more of a large scale one. If you don't know, this game actually, I believe it already came out in Japan. So it's already a collection of those games. So this is not a WayForward specific thing in terms of, making the game. It's like the localization of it. I do not believe there's a physical copy of the Japanese release. So Limited Run Games is, I believe, the first physical copy of this. I could be wrong. This is my knowledge of not looking into this beyond what I have observed on the internet. So, but yeah, it's like late 2023, early 2024 is what they're shooting for right now. So I'll keep an eye on it. There's very little situations that I'm going to purchase something through Limited Run Games. I didn't make it as a news story on my list here, but one other thing that was announced in that showcase that was pretty cool was they're finishing up the Shantae Game Boy Advance game that got canceled back in like 2000s, early 2000s. So they're going to go ahead and finish that up and put it out, which is really cool. I think that's a cool idea, going back and taking a canceled game and wrapping it up, basically. So I'd be really curious to see how much of that game stays, like how many of the decisions about that game get made in the modern day versus back then, and how much do they feel like they have to change to make sure it's not an experience that feels, I don't know if dated is the right word, but fits with the sensibilities of the Shantae series today. Which maybe they're saying that, like, hey, that doesn't actually matter because this is when this game was made. So all that matters is that it fits with the sensibilities of the first Shantae game, right? So I think that's really cool, though. I believe it's a Game Boy Advance game only right now. I do not believe they have announced any other digital distribution platforms, but through Limited Run Games, I would imagine that they are trying to encourage people to buy those GBA carts up. So I don't know why I said it like that. Couple different updates to some previous games here. Time Gal Rebirth got announced, but it's a part of that Taito Laserdisc collection that we mentioned last week. So it's actually just a thing that's in there. It is a sequel to Time Gal, I believe. However, it is not presented the same way Time Gal is in the previous games, which required full animation. This is more of like a visual novel style presentation, but it does incorporate QuickTime events and things like that. And there's like a new girl. I mean, Time Gal herself or whatever. I don't know if her name is Time Gal. Miss Time Gal is in there. But there's a new Time Gal girl as well in there too. So that's pretty cool. I don't think it's been an official localization announcement for that collection yet, for that. Umber Claw, not out yet, but got announced for the Nintendo Switch. If you don't know, this is the Inti Creates game that they announced a handful of months back. They said it was PC only, which for Inti Creates was very strange because they will usually at least put stuff out on Switch first. So they have said, actually, yeah, we're going to put this out on Switch. They showed off more gameplay in this trailer, though, and I'm glad they did. I feel like this is probably the trailer that should have been the reveal trailer, honestly. But basically it's, showed a little bit more of how that game works, and I was right on the spirits being your attacks being the big thing. So you collect different animal spirits, and that basically transforms how your attack works. Your cat also turns into a cat man, in this game. So that was, I guess interesting. I guess it's probably like a powered up state or something. 4Gamer had some impressions of this because it was at Bit Summit. And they just kind of described a few different features, like the ability to dash through enemies. And if enemies if you pass through an enemy when you're dashing, it burns stamina gauge instead of killing you. And then it sounds like you can also kind of like absorb skill energy if you're dashing through attacks and things like that. It is a one-hit death game, it sounds like, so there's no health bar. However, you can be revived. And it sounds like the number of revives you have per continue is 9 because you're a cat. But it seems like the revive is not a guaranteed thing. It sounds like you have to do something maybe related to the animal skills. So again, this is the machine translation thing, and there may very well be like, I mean, it's a bit summit. I imagine there's some foreign journalists there writing about this stuff. So there probably is a news story about it out there, but I only looked at the 4Gamer article. But it seems like maybe it comes at like the sacrifice of like one of your animal skills, basically. So again, I could be wrong about that. But the bigger thing is that I think they showed enough of that game that it looks unique. It seems like momentum is like a fairly big part of that game, which if you don't know, integrates games. I think that's the strongest games they typically make are ones that are built around character momentum and your attacks fitting into that. So I'll be really curious to see how that turns out. But I'll probably get it on Switch. I think Any Creates games typically run pretty well on Switch, so I'm usually pretty happy about that. A little bit of an update on the Baten Kaitos HD remake. I think this is coming out in September, so fairly soon. No physical for the US announced yet still, though, so I'm still watching and waiting. Watching respectfully. Monolith Soft, what's going on there? Bandai Namco. Bandai Namco is the one who decides, I'm sure. Really, the only thing I want to note here is that they did confirm that the backgrounds have been redrawn. I'm assuming they're probably using some mix of like AI upscaling and stuff. I could be wrong, but I didn't see any confirmation of that. But the backgrounds look close enough that it looks like maybe like I guess what I suspect is when they say redrawn backgrounds is they did like an AI upscale then cleaned up after it, just based off how it looked, because it looks basically like the original. I could be wrong. Maybe they just painted right over it. So, anyways, the backgrounds are going to look nicer though. They're not going to be your 480p backgrounds. That's basically what's happening. So. Or at least some of them. And then they just said that there's like some various like quality of life changes they're making and stuff like that. So we'll see. I really like the spreadsheet in that game. I like finishing your turn and getting a big old spreadsheet that tells you how things work. So I hope they keep some form of that in there. I think it should also pause combat because I think it is good to learn from that. However, I think it is always best to offer the option for players to not see that. So if I remember correctly in the trailer, they had like a sidebar that would appear and it would detail your damage a little bit. But I think the spreadsheet was always really good at communicating exactly how your damage was calculated, especially with the elemental weaknesses and things like that. Also at Bit Summit was the Umumusume game. I read Inside Games impressions of it, which again, machine translation on these ones. Basically, it seems like that racing game is really focused on lane switching, which if you don't know, in horse racing, each horse has its own lane, right? As far as I'm aware. I don't know. I played Family Jockey on the Wii, and there was lane switching, so I assume that is a concept. Everyone starts in a lane as well. I don't know, maybe not, because then they'll like get together on the corners, right? So maybe like I guess I'm like thinking of like running, right? It's like the track and field or whatever, and you have lanes. Maybe I'm thinking of running and track and fields, and I just got that mixed up with horse racing, because I think horse racing, horses do get up on each other. I don't know. I don't know anything about horse racing. But anyways, but it seems like to be more of that Family Jockey situation where you can switch between lanes kind of thing. And basically it sounds like how you gain speed is through getting behind characters and also, dodging obstacles to make sure you don't get hit. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like speed ups on the ground. I don't think they said anything about that, but I would not be surprised if there's like little dash pads on the ground or something like that you can run into. And then so kind of how you punish characters who are in the front that aren't messing up is through Mario Kart style items and things like that. And I'm sure the Mario characters in front will get like, banana peel type items, things like that. So it looked like the description sounded pretty cool. So I was like, actually, depending on how much of a focus this like racing part of the game is, I could be interested in that. I think the presentation's really nice with it too. So I think the big thing for me is just like, is it something that stands on its own in there? Like, could I buy this for full price and feel good about buying it just for that racing mode? I don't really care about the other stuff. So I don't know. We'll see. I like interesting racing games. That's why I like Kandagawa Jet Girls. I like Excite Truck and Kirby Dream Buffet and things like that, right? And one little last update here before we get into our last two news stories of mostly new things, but maybe a little bit deeper into is Satbox. You don't know, this is a company that makes a bunch of, I guess you would call it, Switch shovelware games. I have previously mentioned them before because I was like, the art for the Satbox games look nice, but then when you go into the video game, they have like these very Minecraft-looking characters, and I don't really like how they look. But their series is like the R series in a very like Wii, like ROUR, Wii whatever, family whatever, Namco, Nintendo situation with that Konami situation too. It's like we ski or something like that. I don't know. What is their game called? I don't remember. They have some winter sports. Anyways, that stuff aside, so they put out a new game, or announced a new game called Summertime Party Summer Party Time. There we go. That's what it is. And it is another one of those minigame collections, not anything unique in that regard, but they changed the aesthetic to it a little bit, and they made the characters rounded, and I think they added more, I feel like, customizable character elements. Not customizable characters, I should say. Elements of each character that like make them look more unique. So they're still kind of falling within the template of like these kind of cheap, easy to repurpose character models kind of thing. But I think they put in a little bit more detail in a way that I think that works really well. So we talked about Sapbox before, I don't remember when, but I just want to talk about that because I had previously said that like these games are really cute, but aesthetically I don't really know how I feel about the game itself. It's the art on the box that I like more. So I think they found like the right mix of like budget cute. Kind of looks very like Ninja Breadman-ish in a lot of ways. And I think they've had party time games before. However, even the aesthetics of those games I think were not quite where I wanted them to be. They had very like I don't know what you would call it. They're like little white characters, like these big long black eyes that like moved vertically kind of thing. They kind of look like one of the characters in Kirby. I don't remember what that character was. But like they kind of look like little robot people, I guess maybe is the better way to put it. And all the characters just look a little too similar. So I feel like with Summer Party Time, they found a nice way to like distinguish it. So I don't know if that's enough to get me to buy the game. I still like the character art in the R series in general. But they haven't like tried to implement that character art into the game itself, which, you know, given those are very traditional anime styled character designs, I don't know if they would ever go out of their way to try to represent that because that probably would just cost too much money for their budget series of games. So they did actually try to do some more elaborate games visually. They have like a zombie battle royale game is what it's called. I don't think it's an actual battle royale game. I think it's just called that. And then they also have I think it's called like Dark Dungeon Knights or something like that. And both of those games have realistically proportioned humans. And it is kind of like a voxel look kind of thing to it to some extent. And the characters are a bit more defined in those games as well. But again, these are all very budget games that Satbox have been doing for a long time. You can get them for a few bucks on the Nintendo Switch eShop. But they have done some like physical collections in Japan, I think, as well. Before we get into our 18 plus talk, I did want to talk about one game that really kind of caught my eye visually as well. And that is Harry Potter Magic Awakened. This is a PC and mobile game that I had no idea was a game, but came out. It's always interesting because like I look at mobile games all the goddamn time, but like something like this gets past me and I don't really know how. But anyway, so Harry Potter Magic Awakened came out June 27th, and like visually this game reminds me a lot of like, you remember like Ghostbusters on the Wii? So like you have this game on the 360 and PS3 that's like, you know, pushing, it's not the best looking game, but it is staying in line with modern video games in the sense of like, here's what human characters look like in modern video games. And then so for the Wii version, you're like, okay, we want this version we got to reprogram this version of the game anyways, because whatever, we're going to do a bunch of work to make this thing unique because the Wii's a different platform, right? So it's like, might as well change everything and like change the visual style to better match what the Wii is capable of kind of thing, right? So it's like, here's this very cartoony version of Ghostbusters on the Wii, essentially. It reminds me a little bit of that, where it's kind of like a very cartoony version of a Harry Potter, as if there was like a 360 PS3 game that was like, or a higher budget. There was a higher budget Harry Potter game. It is not based off it in that way, but it does kind of feel like that, of like, here's this like more budget version of that. It's a card strategy RPG, and it has that kind of whole thing as well of like, hey, you're gonna create a character and live your life here as a new admission to Hogwarts kind of thing, right? And I just like the style of it visually a lot. It is just kind of like exaggerated style. It's not very like Japanese cute kind of thing, but reminds me a little bit of like some of those old CG movies that were like maybe a little bit more like Nightmare and was it Christmas in Nightmare Land? I don't know. The popular movie with Jack Skellington, Mr. Jack Skellington. I don't know what that movie's called. I know I should. I don't. But it reminds me of that a little bit, not exactly, but like that kind of exaggeration to the character designs and things like that. And I think it has a really cute look to it overall. But yeah, as a card RPG, basically you have a character it's an arena thing. So you go in a duel. Typically it looks like you have two characters standing on each side, and then your character kind of has like an auto attack field around them. So it seems like they'll just automatically attack anything that gets close to them. I don't know if that applies to the other caster or not, because most of this game, for what I saw people were doing, was the characters themselves would kind of stay put on the other side of the match. And then what you would do is cast familiars. And so those familiars would appear, and those would kind of like walk and pressure the other character to like fight back and stuff like that. Now, there are spells in this game that are like more straightforward magic spells, and those do have area of effect. So it seems like what you want to kind of do is try to get a position where, you know, you can target, you know, either multiple familiars at once or target their caster in the back and do actual damage kind of thing, right? So the strategy seems to be, do you overpower somebody with familiars, and do you have to cast to reduce the number of familiars being sent to you, or cast to do damage to the person on the other side, essentially. So I think it looks pretty cool. I think it looks like it plays really well as well, and I think like visually it made all the right decisions in my opinion. Maybe the one thing that stands out weird is that like when you get into certain scenes where like there's kind of like stock animations, right? And like not pre like, you know, you get cutscenes where like the character's movement is clearly like motion captured, or like, you know, hand animated the whole scene or something like that, right? In the scenes where you get like the like where they just call upon okay, with dialogue combined with talk animation 3, right? The animations in those kind of scenes it's kind of really fast in a weird way. You could probably just slow it down, but it's like very exaggerated in a weird way. So I don't have a problem with it. It's kind of neat. But your main character does have like a voice, which is kind of weird in those creative character games, because like your character has a defined personality then and a defined voice. So like you may not necessarily like what your character is, right, in those kind of situations. But I know other games have done that as well. So God Eater is interesting because it like gets around that by only having your character talk at the very end of the game, and it's like a very generic phrase kind of thing. So, which I kind of appreciated the first time, because it's like you spent this whole game ignoring your character's presence, then all of a sudden he goes out, "I will do this for all my friends," or something like that, right? And it's like, oh, what are you doing talking, buddy? You haven't talked for the last 80 hours. What's up with this? So there's also some mini games in the collection as well. There's like a dancing ball mini game, weirdly enough. There's like class quizzes, and then they also said they're gonna add Quidditch later. You know, it's a live service game, so they're continuing to update. But there's also like you have the ability to like fly around the school and stuff in full 3D. So you know, it is one of those games that it doesn't have like the full open world look and feel of whatever that other Harry Potter game's called. I don't even remember the one that like had a whole thing that happened with it. But it does kind of feel like it has a pretty well realized world that you can walk around Hogwarts and stuff and fly around, you know, on the outside of Hogwarts and things like that. So one interesting thing I noticed as well, looking at the Japanese website, is the Japanese website focuses a lot on 2D character art, and also the new characters in this story, where the US website focuses on the 3D assets in the game and also the old characters. So what does Harry Potter look like? What does Hermione, whatever her name is, looks like, right? What do those characters look like? It's just kind of interesting to see that like dynamic between them kind of thing as well. So I didn't ever like go deep into this, but you know, I didn't want to talk about the Hogwarts stuff when it was like super, super hot with like Hogwarts Legacy, is that what it's called? With like the discussion around it and stuff, because it's just at some point it's just like it's not worth getting into the conversation whether you feel either way, because people are not there to talk, they're there to argue essentially, right? But I did go and look at the Hogwarts Legacy reviews as well on the Japanese internet. A few of them, not all of them. So, you know, I could have just happened to pick the ones that were good. But it seems like the Japanese reception from a critical standpoint of that game was also positive. So I know some people were saying like IGN overly, you know, fluffed the game up. But, you know, you have Famitsu giving it like, you know, 3 9s and a 10, right? So, you know, other outlets felt that way as well. But, you know, I understand why. There's a lot of social issue stuff related around the Harry Potter franchise that is, in my opinion, totally reasonable. How that manifests from a, you know, talking about a game standpoint is kind of a whole other thing. But, yeah, I thought it looked really cute. And unfortunately, it's a live service game, so I'm not going to play it. It's, you know, if it was like a Switch release that was 20 hours long, I probably would be like, oh, yeah, I'll check that out. Says man still sitting on Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition. Anyways, our last story here. Like I said, this is regarding an 18+ news story. So if you do not want to hear about this, feel free to leave now. I love you. goodbye. We're talking about Illusion. Illusion announced they are shutting down. They are shutting down, I believe, operation. Like, they're not making any new games. I know that much, but I believe they are shutting down their online store. I believe on August 1st, they sell physical copies of their games. And then I believe everything is wrapping up like at the end of August, essentially. So basically it's like September. By September, they will be gone. It's an earlier date than that, but basically by September, they'll be gone. These guys have been around a long time. I believe it's 1996-ish or so. And I think and if you don't know anything about Illusion, I think what probably defines them more than anything is I feel like they were a company, at least in more recent years, that kind of strived on just like very high quality visuals with their characters and things like that. And also customization is a big part of the thing as well. So, as 18 plus games, how important that is to you is going to depend on you, but there's a whole scene of people working on that stuff. And like the kind of the big thing I'm aware of with Honey Select or with Illusion games and stuff like that. I'll talk about Honey Select here in a second, is like the mod scene seems to be very active there, like adding to those games as well. So like people seem to continue to add and adjust for those games. So the more popular games in recent years, or maybe most notable games in recent years, Honey Select, that got some attention in the West. VR Kanojo, that's the Summer Lesson kind of knockoff game where they saw Summer Lesson and they're like, we want to make a hentai version of this, essentially. So they did that. And then more recently, this is stuff I did not hear about until this news came, but there's a game they released late last year called Room Girl. And Room Girl seems to be basically a kind of a business simulator, it looks like, to some extent. But then also, a bunch of women working there and, sexy times kind of thing. And then that was September 2022. And then they released an expansion for that Room Girl Paradise in April, which seemed to be more of like, here's a cafe kind of place they'll work in. I have not played this game. This is totally based off my impressions watching the video for it and stuff like that, right? A lot of these games, I will say these latest games, looks like they're built on very similar backbones, though, when you look at the character creators and things like that for them, and like just like the style of them, too. And I kind of feel like we're at the point with a lot of video game visuals where like there's not a lot you can do to make big strides. So like part of me wonders if just like there's not as much interest in this company, when they kind of hit the Honey Select era of character graphics and stuff. I don't know their history entirely. Maybe there's something else beforehand, but Honey Select was like the really big one, I feel like. And because there's like an ongoing mod scene for that, I really wonder if just like at some point, how much more do you need these games kind of made for them? So, some of these games are actual games though. I mean, like Honey Select and stuff, I think has like some vague dating elements to it. Like I think the characters, you can assign them personalities and they have dialogue and stuff. There's another thing called Koikatsu Paradise? Is that what it's called? Koikatsu Sunshine, which is more like anime aesthetic kind of thing. I do not think Koikatsu Sunshine looks nearly as good as the Honey Select games, though. I don't think they really met that modern look when it comes to anime style games with that. That looks like more like something that came out like the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, in my opinion. So, but yeah, so they've had games that are like actual games, though. They had some title. Do I have to name it for here? I don't remember. I think it's called AI Girl or AI Shoujo. That was a survival game they put out recently where you're like on a deserted island with another girl. Maybe it's multiple girls, but it's like a survival sim and you like farm and stuff like that. Back in the day, they had an old game called Brutish Mine, which seemed to be like a kind of JRPG kind of thing. And then Death Blood. I couldn't figure out what Death Blood was. It seemed like a lot of like walking around 3D environments and stuff. So, some of these games are more video game kind of things. So, but these guys have been around a long time. So I do think it's worth mentioning. If you know anything about them, that you like have any insight on the developers and like how important they are, let me know. I've always assumed they were important, but I always kind of think I've assumed that because visually their games have come off with like a lot of visual polish generally, or as having a lot of visual polish. But then also the prices of these games are very high prices. Which I mean, when I went in Japan, I mentioned before that like Japanese prices for like doujin hentai games and things like that are significantly higher than in the US kind of thing, or at least what we would expect to pay, I think. But these are games that were full retail price games, 5,900 yen, 10,000 yen and stuff like that, right? Like what you would pay for a full video game, right? So I feel like to me at least, they always come off as like a premier depth with that regard. So I think a lot of people, if you don't know like how long these guys have been like relevant for, if you were like somebody who watched X Play, Sexy Beach was on X Play back when that happened. I think Sexy Beach 3 specifically, if I remember correctly. They had like a review of that on there. I do not trust X Play at all to take that interestingly or seriously in any way that isn't just a bunch of boob jokes, right? And then I won't say the name of one of these just because I don't really know. I mean, I already said the word hentai, right? YouTube is weird about some stuff. This game has an offensive name in its title, but if you're around the mid-2000s, late 2000s, you probably know what game this is. It was a game that got a really big controversy here in the West because it featured, non-consensual sexual stuff. They like at that time, a bunch of like, or I don't know if a bunch, I know there are examples of like 18 plus game companies who like started banning foreign access to their website due to concerns about all this like vocal backlash from the West in a market they didn't even sell their game, right? Illusion did start localizing and selling their games, I will say. I do not believe at that time that they were doing that though. So anyways, sad to see it go, I guess. I guess it depends on how you feel about that. There's probably a lot of discussions you can have about the, like, I don't know what you would say, social issues around a lot of these games and, like, how they treat and show women, right, in a lot of ways. But that's also just kind of like, I think 18 plus stuff in general. It's a bigger problem with 18 plus stuff in general, not just so much Illusion. And then also you have the cross-cultural stuff, right? This is a Japanese company, right? So anyways, I thought it was cute that their blog post, I don't think that like any text in the post itself says this, but if you go to the blog post that they say that they're like, hey, they were shutting down, the text for the URL is see you next time. So I'm sure some of these people will go off and start up their own thing and things like that. 18 plus scene is fairly big, I feel like. I don't know how profitable a lot of it is because there is just this like general feeling around that kind of stuff that it should be free on the internet. And I can tell you for certain, I have seen a lot of Illusion stuff around for piracy. So I do not think a lot of people, especially in the West, were particularly paying for it. So, but that's what people do. Anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneTour.com is the website. What is there going on? PCFX podcast went up last week, so check that out if you didn't. If you don't know, it is a interview we did with the HuNext guy who worked at HuNext in the late 90s. Check that out. That was really cool. And like as a HuNext fan, it was like really cool for me. I'm hoping we can do stuff with more HuNext people in the future, but obviously trying to get in contact with and interview someone in the Japanese space is a challenging thing on its own. But there are some leads I have on those that I'd like to try to follow through on. So, also, there's a podcast highlight video going up this week for Asphalt Urban GT on the Nintendo DS. Again, we talked about this thing on the podcast, but I edited a bunch of video and music to it. So if you want to hear me talk about that in a way that's not just rambling into your ears, I highly recommend it. I think Asphalt Urban GT is an awesome game. That is one of my... Gosh, I've never done like a ranking list for consoles. Maybe that'd be a fun thing to do. I always talked about like maybe showing off my games like as a physical collection kind of thing, but like maybe ranking them would be kind of fun. I think ranking games is kind of silly. I think to some extent us humans really like to rank stuff, and I don't necessarily think there's a problem with ranking stuff. I do talk about sometimes when we use language, we use it to put down other games, and I don't necessarily want to I don't like that so much that we have to focus so much on that, but I think ranking games does kind of like leads to that language a lot. So I don't know. I don't want to be like no fun. I think there's value to stuff like ranking games, but I do also don't think it's nice to be like, see this other game? I think this game looks like shit. This game looks way better kind of thing. I don't really like that kind of talk of where it's just like, we need to shove another game down to elevate our game more. And how do we do that? Say this modern popular game that does a similar style is terrible, right? But I think it's hard, and people don't like, it's really hard to think about, people working on the other side of that when you don't interact with them directly, right? So, I know a lot of people for like game journalism work, they're like, we don't really want you to be affected by that kind of thought. And I totally get that. Again, from a product perspective, I think that makes sense. But, I do think it is important for us to be constructive, because you don't have to be an asshole to somebody to give them feedback, right? Is I think my feeling on that. So, I think it is good for us to be more considerate of, if I was in the room with the person who did this, what are the words that I would use to do that, right? Because you can still accomplish the same goal without yelling at someone. So, anyways, that's it for that. I'm going to hopefully work on some stuff tonight. I'm hoping to get back on the scripts. Last time I was trying to do script writing, it did not go so well. So I'm hoping tonight that will be a little bit better. A little bit better. A little bit. So yeah. But yeah, look forward to the asphalt thing this week. And then I think the Monolith Soft ranking video goes up the week after that, I think is the plan. So let me know if that changes. But otherwise, you guys have a great week. Bye.